La doctora Ana Cotrim es profesora de literatura en la Universidad de Brasilia desde 2016. Cuenta con un doctorado en filosofía por la Universidad de Sao Paulo, institución en la que también cursó su maestría. Además, realizó un postdoctorado en literatura en la Universidad Federal de Minas Gerais. Actualmente, la doctora Cotrim forma parte del programa de licenciatura en educación rural. Asimismo, es profesora orientadora en el programa de posgrado en literatura, donde aborda diversas áreas relacionadas con la filosofía, la literatura y la educación, con especial énfasis en estética y teoría literaria. Su trabajo se centra en corrientes como la estética marxista, el realismo artístico, la literatura brasileña y la literatura vinculada a la educación rural. Entre sus publicaciones más recientes destacan los libros Literatura y realismo en George Lukács, los efectos del giro marxista en sus ideas estéticas y el realismo y su actualidad.
Pues aquí estamos con Ana Cotrim, ya vieron su biografía, una gran intelectual que nos visita desde Brasil, que conoce mucho sobre temas del marxismo, del leninismo, de Lukács, del sionismo, muchos temas. Welcome, Ana.
Thank you very much.
We're going to speak in English because it's our point of contact, because I don't speak Portuguese, I should learn it. And you're just visiting us here in Mexico, so thank you very much for this wonderful interview.
No, you're welcome. I thank you.
So you're here participating in a session, a meeting about Lukács, about Lenin, about rethinking Marxism in general in the 21st century. Why is it important to look at the Russian Revolution, which is also one of the big topics that are being analyzed in this seminar at the SAGE? Why is it important to look back at the Russian Revolution and to rethink Lenin and Lukács?
Well, first of all, we see that the world is coming to an abyss with capitalism. Capitalism is bringing us all to an abyss, to the end. First of all, because of the environmental things. And secondly, because of all the human crises that exist in the world, the many wars and the many killings. And so we have to look back to a situation where we can overcome capitalism, first of all. This is necessary just for us to continue living in the world, on Earth. And so we have to look back to all the philosophers and the thinkers that thought about this possibility of coming over capitalism, and which is communism, because it has to be another way of production that surpass private property and become a production that is turned not to profit and market, but to human life. So this is the way this is the only way, in fact, that we see to continue existing in the world. So we have to get back to the thinkers, and we have to get back to the practice and the experiences of history that tried to do so. Even if it's not complete, if it's not perfect, and if it's now not being existing anymore. But we have to look to those experiences and learn from them.
The French Revolution still has a great reputation, right? So people always talk about the French Revolution as a referent for the birth of modernity and human rights and democracy even. And the Russian Revolution is somehow, some thinkers are trying to sort of forget it, as if it's not as important as the French Revolution. But the Russian Revolution is equally important or more important than the French Revolution as a world historical event, right?
Yes, I think so. And in fact, I think they are both important. The French Revolution to bring us out of the serfdom and feudal way of production, but it didn't predict all the contradictions that exist in capitalism. So it is something obsolete, in fact, because all the ideas of the French Revolution proved not concrete in this society they create. This revolution created. So that's the problem. The problem is not to compare or to say this is more important than the other. The point is history evolves. And a French Revolution was one step to the world we know now. But the Russian Revolution was a try to get over the world we know now. So the contradictions that were brought by the world created by the French Revolution, I think. So I think for us now, it's more important to look to the Russian Revolution. And I think French Revolution is still something that people think as positive and so on, because dominant class, bourgeoisie, is the class that in its progressive moment of history did, I don't know how to say, the French Revolution, but and it is still the dominant class. So they look back to themselves as their universal form, their positive form, and they want to bring it back to the present. But the present has proven this not practical anymore. And on the opposite, the Russian Revolution is the revolution of their enemies, the working class. And so it's not in fashion, it's not beautiful. As Marx would say, it's the ugly revolution as opposed to the beautiful revolution. And that's the reason.
And the importance precisely of Lukács, George Lukács, Hungarian theorist who precisely looked at the Russian Revolution in this world historical terms and tried to make us understand the depths of what the revolution meant, not only in the economic sphere, but also in the cultural and social sphere. Why is it so important to look at Lukács in particular today?
Yes, Lukács, it's really important to look at today because he's the most consistent philosopher that wants to make his way to Marx. So Lukács, first of all, he's important because Marx is his base in his point of how do I say, ponto de partida e de chegada.
The starting point
Starting point and ending point. Thanks. And so he's the one who tried to develop and explain in terms of philosophy many points that in Marx are not very developed. So, and also based on the Marx worldview, develop other subjects that Marx didn't see. So capitalism, imperialism, and other situations, and art, and modern art, and so on, that Marx couldn't see. But first, he tried to explain in philosophical terms things that in Marx are very mixed to the concrete situations in history that he was looking at. So, for example, aesthetics, arts, philosophy of art. Marx talked about many authors and talked about art, but it is in the midst of his work. There is not a text, finished text by Marx that about art and about literature. And Lukács is the one who took this worldview, took these many mentions and many aspects, and developed a great and enormous, in fact, thought about art and aesthetics and literature. Both in his period during the 30s, when he started to write about literature, and his great project of the aesthetics, the peculiarity of the aesthetics, which is his one of his late works. And also in the subject of ontology, which is something that Marx, maybe he has mentioned this word, ontology, 2 or 3 times in his work. But he understands this important, how do I say, core of his work, and developed in philosophical terms, explaining and even developing further the meaning of this ontological term that Marx represents related to Hegel and other philosophers.
People tend to think of Marx as being the theorist of economic structure, sociologist, but they don't tend to relate Marx with these kinds of topics like aesthetics or theater even. I was reading an article you sent to me before this interview about how Marx admired very much Shakespeare, right?
Yes.
And that he was very interested in this area, although he didn't write a whole lot about the aesthetics itself. Lukács is the one who really takes out that more artistic and theatrical and cultural side to Marx. And this is related to the Russian Revolution as well itself, right? I mean, Lukács is writing in the context of the Russian Revolution, and he writes about the Russian Revolution, right?
Also, not only, but also. Yes, Lukács starts his turn into Marxism with the Russian Revolution. But as he says, it takes a decade of learning Marxism, the period of learning Marxism, because in his youth, his conception was completely different. He was worried about many themes alike, but he didn't develop in the same way. So Russian Revolution was the turning point for him. And during the 20s, he learns Marxism, as he says. He turns into this work, and he turns into the connection between theory and praxis. And so he notices that Marx is an original way of seeing the world in general, not only economically. Also in terms of developing the human being, subjective, developing sensitivity, how consciousness comes to be developed in history by human beings. So he looks at Marx and notices that he is a turning point in the history of philosophy. And then he apprehends all this worldview and develops. And then, so it is related to the Russian Revolution, but it goes beyond, it goes much beyond the Russian Revolution. And one of the things he says, there is and there is not an aesthetics in Marx, because all this worldview contains some thoughts that have to be developed in many aspects, but it is how do I say? Well, it's the beginning of materialism, the beginning of understanding something that in schools nowadays everybody knows. What makes us human? We work on nature, and with that we transform nature in human world, and in this process we transform ourselves in human. This is Marx. It didn't exist before Marx in terms of thought, this kind of thinking that now is a major way of thinking. Nobody will question that, right? And also, for example, another point that Marx it's the separation between body and spirit. It is during modernity, all the philosophers have some kind of separation between body and spirit. And so, for example, Hegel, he thinks the part of us that is human and humanizable, I don't know if this word exists, is the spirit. The body has to be controlled, and with the body, the passions, the feelings, and so on. And Marx is a new view about that. Our consciousness, our subjective, our feelings, all this part is turned into human together, together with humanization of our five senses, right? So spirit comes with the humanization of the body. They are not two separate things. So we can think of passions and feelings as humanizable, as educational. And so, for example, art, that is a field of human production that directs to all subjective senses, imagination, feelings, thoughts, etc., is for Marx the best way of self-consciousness, the best of the production. So it's completely different, and this is something that it's not directly economic, and that it's original.
And it was more or less around this time when, right after the Russian Revolution, that the manuscripts of 1844 were found, right? Because they had been disappeared
for a while,
right?
The economical philosophical manuscripts of 1844, it was found around 30.
About 1930.
1930.
Right? So this is simultaneous with Lukács's development of re-encountering of Marx, no?
Yes, yes. It's he was among the thinkers that found it, and studied it for the first time. And together with his actuation in Hungarian communist movement, the finding of the manuscripts was very important to him. Why? Because there Marx approaches the topics like objectivity and subjectivity and so on in a different way. In fact, manuscripts are manuscripts. He didn't prepare to publish in, so it's very hard, it's very hermetic. It's not an easy text, but it addresses, as a study to himself, it addresses these topics and for example, addresses Hegel and Adam Smith and all these modern thinkers that were his base, critically his base. And it was new to Lukács, this kind of approach. And he says, I use it to read Marx with the lens of Hegel. And it was not that it's not in the other parts of the work, but it was necessary for me to find a new text and a text who addresses directly this point, which is his turning point in terms of philosophy to the others, for me to realize, to notice this core of his thought, which is new to the other philosophy. Yes.
Lukács is a fascinating personality because used by Western bourgeois philosophers, he's accused of being a Stalinist, right?
Yes.
But the Stalinists didn't like him particularly either, right? He was too eclectic and cosmopolitan for the vulgar Stalinists, no?
Yes, and many communists too, not Stalinists, other communists thought that he was a bourgeois. So yes, the destiny of his work is really sad in this sense, because the West considered him a Stalinist and the East considered him bourgeois and so on. But both are wrong. Both are wrong, completely wrong. He was a very critical. He was in the party until 1965, 56, sorry. Until 1956 he was in the party. And he gets away, apart, not apart, I don't know if he really gets out of the party or just not
distances himself.
Distance, yes. With the Hungarian Revolution in 1956 against Stalinism in Hungary. But he was always a critic, and especially in the field of art. He was never one who apprehends Ždanovism and so on in the field of art.
So I'm going to interrupt you for just 1 second because we have to go for a commercial break. Ahorita regresamos, continuar con esta fascinante conversación sobre George Lucas, Lenin, el marxismo, la revolución rusa. Vamos a hablar también sobre Gaza, sobre el sionismo, también es una gran experta en ese tema. Ana Kotrim, nuestra invitada. No se vayan, ahorita regresamos. Continuamos aquí con Ana Kotrim, nuestra invitada especial desde Brasil. ¿Cuál ciudad vives?
Brasilia.
Brasilia. We'll go to English because that's our our common language. Brasilia is
the capital of the country.
The capital of the country and a monument to modernism. No, it was a city that was constructed for the car, right?
Yes.
Is it hard to live there?
No. Nowadays I got used to it. I like the city, but in the beginning it was very weird, just because of this. Too many cars, not many people walking in the streets, too empty of people, but many gardens, many trees. Yes, it's very beautiful, and the architecture is very unique also. It's a city to know. Maybe someday.
And what is the political situation in general in Brazil today?
That's a hard question. That's a hard question. Well, we have a coalition government, you know that, which is led by Lula, who is a very legendary left-wing leader. But in fact, nowadays the government is very directed to neoliberalism.
Really?
Yes, with the, I don't know how to say, the ajuste fiscal.
With a fiscal adjustment.
Fiscal adjustment. And so the government kept the same budget to health, to education, to universities, more or less that was in the previous government.
With Bolsonaro?
Yes, with
Really?
Bolsonaro. Yes, very slight differences. And so it's really a problem. We had a strike. University professors, we had a strike some months ago, and we didn't earn many things, but it's a hard situation. People are very poor, but institutionally, in terms of discourse, in speech, and other parts, it's much better. It's incomparable. But in economic issue, in parts, in economic question, it is very bad. I think my evaluation is it's terrible, in fact.
But is it more because of structural factors, like there's not much that Brazil can do with this globalized finance which controls public policies, or is it because of a lack of political will to face up to these international powers?
I think there is a pressure, internal pressure on the parliament and so on, which is very right-winged. But I think it could be a little, it could pressure a little more, you know, into our side.
Right.
The political propaganda during elections was, we are not going to keep the fiscal adjustment.
Of course.
And then they come and keep the fiscal adjustment. So I think it could be done differently. I think it's something that it's a choice. It's partially a choice, and also like the agrarian reformation. It's correct. Okay, it's a problem too. And our leader in the movement of the landless workers is saying this all the time. It's not coming forward. It was one of the points of this government too, and it's not being done at all. And also the indigenous people's demarcation of territory, it's not coming on. We have a ministry for the indigenous people, but it has no power to do anything, and so on. So because of the economical choices, and I think it partially our choices, many other aspects of life are not going forward. And this is really a problem, because many theory thinkers are saying that it will lead us to the extreme right wing again. Because life will not be improved. So they say unemployment is very low. Okay, but what kind of employment is this? You know, so I think it's leading us to a bad path, to something that will throw us in the lap of the extreme right wing. That's what I think.
A little bit like the Argentinian case.
Yes,
no?
exactly. But I think it's worse than Argentinian case. But it's the same thing. It's something that repeats itself in history. When it's some left-wing party comes to power, and instead of trying hard to realize this program, their program, workers' program, they conciliate with right-wing. In general, the extreme right-wing comes after all. It's, for example, the Weimar Republic.
Right.
So I think it's going to happen again.
Let's go back to the positive case of Lenin, because I think that it's important to really rethink these political leaders of the past, because someone like Lenin, precisely because of this excess of moderation, that excess of moderation, no, the radical center, as Zizek says, right?
Yes.
We're starting to, there's this pressure to forget about these radical leaders like Lenin, no? And Lenin is almost universally thought of as an authoritarian leader. Right? One of the topics of this seminar, this at the Centro de Investigaciones Interdisciplinarios, el CEICH, a seminar organized by our friends Aide Garcia y Pepe Gandarilla. One of the big questions was, can we think of Lenin as a Democrat? Is that a possible thing to say? Can we say that Lenin is actually thinking of a different way of understanding democracy? How to respond to these people who say that Lenin shouldn't even be read anymore because he's an authoritarian of the past.
Yes, well, you said he was a Democrat, and I agree completely. I wrote it down in my notebook, Lenin is a Democrat. Yes, I don't think where it come from. In fact, the idea that he was authoritarian is really comes from the Stalinism, it comes from other things that not Lenin at all. First of all, it's this, what attitude or what writing, what text of Lenin can be how do I say, interpreted as authoritarian. I cannot say one.
Dictatorship of the proletariat, no? The concept.
Ah, yes, the concept of dictatorship, yes. Okay, I'll get there. But I think he's completely a Democrat, and he advances the concept itself of democracy with the idea that getting back from the original idea of democracy, which is power of the people, which is the people decides over all the important issues we have to decide on society. And so really decide. And he, in the beginning of the Russian Revolution, the Soviets operated, and the operation of the Soviets was the radical democracy, which is in it. You can say?
No, I was just going to say that Soviet means council. Consejo. Sometimes people imagine Soviet being somehow bureaucracy, no? But
no.
Soviet is consejo, is council, it's people's assemblies, no?
People's
so when he says all the power to the Soviets, he's saying all the power to these communal decision-making processes, right?
Yes, communal is the word, the key word, I think. That precisely, Soviets are communal councils, which can be in neighborhoods or in industries or fabrics or even in lands. Well, and so meetings were made, decisions were taken, and these decisions, they took one representative to carry, I don't know, to carry this decision to another instance. No? So the representative is going to say and defend the decision of those people in another instance, in an instance above, and so on. So it's much more democratic than the system of representation that we have in bourgeoisie governments. Which is you elect a representative and he does whatever he wants. That's true.
You delegate power, right?
You delegate, yes. You don't take the decision. People didn't take the decision. For example, what we're saying about Brazil, we elected this government with an idea, and this idea is not taken on. So what can we do? We are going against, but if we go against, then there is the extreme right wing and so on. And so it's not democratic. In fact, it's an autocratic government. What we call democracy is not democratic. It's a way of government. It's how do I say this? A system of government. And it is not really democratic because it doesn't give to the people the power of decisions. So what Lenin was saying, and even when he was saying dictatorship of the proletariat, okay, dictatorship of the working class, they are dictating over who? Over the dominant class, the capitalists, the half a dozen families who own the world. Are these people oppressed when they are taken, when their property are taken and given back to the people who built it? No, it's not being oppressed. So the word dictatorship, it's a word that nowadays is related to something oppressive and anti-democratic, but in fact it is not, because it's the power to the people, the idea of power of the people.
And Lenin also uses it in the strict classic sense of the Roman dictators, right? So the Romans appointed dictators for specific tasks and for a limited amount of time, right? So you appoint a dictator to defend the republic against an invasion. You give him special powers, to control the army and defend it, right? During 1 year until he has won or been defeated in a war. So in the same idea, Lenin is thinking of some as a temporary, transitional moment in which instead of 1% no, deciding over 99%, 99% now decide over 1%, but eventually you don't have to have any kind of differences at all, at least in terms of class, no? So it's a,
Yes.
it's a transitional theory, no? And from a moment of democracy to even more democracy, right?
Yes, it's a moment of transit, and in the moment when the state was still necessary, because the idea that is not realized, not done, is that we are going to they were going to, as Marx and Lenin would think, not that it happened, destroy the state. State is something related to the class structure of society. So as long as the state is still necessary as an institution, he would be governed by a proletariat dictatorship. But the idea is to get over the existence of a state. That for Marx is alienation of our powers of self-organization. State is this, the alienation of the people of our own powers of self-organization. Self-organization is the aim, the objective.
And so the thing is that they, in the 1990s, no, with the end of history, with the end of the Cold War, we were taught that all of these ideas were somehow old nostalgias, no, of the past. Why is it so relevant to recuperate these ideas today, in a moment in which apparently capitalism has been successful, conquering the entire world, no? Even smaller pockets around the world in Asia and Africa and Latin America, which used to be outside of the capitalist circuit, are now part of it. Now it's really one world system.
Yes.
How can this still be relevant, this kind of communist thinking?
Well, just for the fact that it's successful for itself, for as a way of production, and for its owners, but it's not successful as a way of living. That's the point. That's the point. It's yes, it has conquered all the world, not only in terms of extensive world, but also intensive. The relationships are more governed by the cash nexus, as Marx would say, than it was before. So all relationships can be relationships in relation to the world, to things, to nature. Everything is an asset. Everything can be traded for cash and money and so on. So yes, but it is leading us to the end, to the end of the nature, to the end of life. So I think this is the point. We don't have crystal balls. So we have to look to the past, to the things that happened. I think that looking to Russian Revolution is also to look at its mistakes, not to be repeated. But there are other examples in history. There's the Cuban Revolution. There was the French Commune. The French Commune was, for Marx, the greatest example, because it started to demolish all state and police and banks and so on. Even if it had only 3 months of life, but it started this demolition of the structures of the capitalist society. So it showed a way, you know, in a sense. So we have to look to the experience of the past, but expecting and perspecting the future, not only the past, but we have to look to the past. And also, as people say, why Marx is still read nowadays, once he's from the 19th century and so on. Well, as long as capitalism is alive, he will be actual, will be necessary, because he, even with the transformations of capitalism itself, financial and so on, Marx understood its roots, its motors, and also predicted many of the situations we live now.
Of course.
Yes, and so
Marx was first and foremost a critic of capitalism, not so much of a theorist of communism. He would have been surprised by the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution itself. That wasn't something he had imagined. He thought revolution was going to happen in Germany or in Italy, no?
In Europe, yes, yes. In French, in fact, he thought in French.
In France,
would be France, yes, in France. He says I won't remember the sino. How do I say when you play?
The symbol of
No, not symbol. Bell. The bell.
Bell.
The bell will be rang by the French rooster. Something like that.
Right.
Something like that. Because France was the land of revolutions and was the first revolution in the new Rhenish newspaper in 1848 during the Spring of the Peoples. Marx analyzed the revolution in Paris in June in 1948, which was massacred by the government that was put in power by the same people. They noticed that the government wouldn't accomplish their needs, the needs of the working class, and so they had another revolution in June, and it was a bloodbath, you know. And Marx said it was defeated, but we won. But they were defeated because what did we lose? We lost bourgeois illusions. So it's the first time that this third state that was bourgeoisie and proletariat get split in two nations. Bourgeois and the working class, and so he analyzes this as a great victory for the conscience of the working class, the loss of the bourgeois illusions, and all this was happening in France. So for Marx, it was going to be in Europe for sure, and maybe Germany and France.
That's important to thinkers like Lucas and others who are updating the analysis in the 20th century. We're going to go to second commercial break.
Okay.
Vamos a un segundo corte y continuamos en unos minutos para culminar este gran diálogo con una pensadora crítica muy importante que nos visita desde Brasilia, Brasil, aquí a la máxima casa de estudios. No se vayan, aquí les esperamos. Continuamos aquí con Ana Kotrim. Gracias a nuestra audiencia. Gracias, estimada Ana. Another topic that you've been writing about recently is the topic of Zionism, especially in the context of the conflict in the Middle East. What is happening? What does this mean in terms of human civilization, Western civilization, and what role does Zionism as an ideology, as a theory, play into what's happening today in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, I think that it's not a conflict, it's an occupation, it's a colonization, it's an extemporary colonization. That's the fact. And it's an occupation of a land, so it's not a conflict, it's a strike on a people. And Zionism is an ideology which is very close to, which is a racist and an apartheid and very close to fascism ideology, in fact. And as it's in its origin, it was one of the responses to the anti-Semitism that happened in Europe. Yeah? So first of all, anti-Semitism is an European event, and Zionism was one of the responses. The other response, which was during the 19th century much more disseminated among the Jewish communities in the countries of Europe, was the idea that they had to have civil rights in their countries. So the idea of equality, the idea of political equality, which was achieved in some of the countries. And Lenin talks about this as in civilized countries, Jewish people have civil rights, have equality, but in Eastern Europe, they were not still granted the human and civil rights in general. So anti-Semitism is something that exists for centuries in Europe, not in Palestine, not in the Middle East. In fact, it's something that has to be said. people, there were a Jewish people, a Jewish community in Palestine much before the establishment of the State of Israel, and the relationship was great. So first of all, this idea that it's a religious debate, conflict, thanks, a religious conflict. It's something created by Western media. It's something completely false. The relationship was great. It was normal, in fact, and many, including many of the Jewish people who lived in Palestine before the occupation, was against the occupation because they saw what it was doing. What was it doing? It was expelling all the people, killing, expelling and destroying the villages and taking the land and so on. So Zionism is an ideology that comes in the dominant classes, and they come to meet also an interest of European dominant classes, which was to have a post, an advanced post in the Middle East. So to colonize the economical and financial interests in general, and political interests of controlling and having a post in the Middle East. So the idea, the ideology behind was that being assimilated, that was the word they used, again, they were against it, being the assimilationism. Being assimilated in the countries they lived, the Jewish people being assimilated, was something that would destroy the Jewish way of life. And so they are against even the Illuminist ideas that the state is not religious. It has the rights are for everyone, and religious is something that is developed in private life. So they are against even this. Moses Mendelssohn is one of the philosophers that advocated this in the 18th century. He was a friend to Lessing, for example. So they were very progressive, and they have these ideas of equality and religious being not interfering in the civil life. Okay. So the idea was that if you are assimilated, or what means to be assimilated? To get equal rights and live normally and speak the language of the country and so on. You'd be betraying your Jewish origin. And so with this idea and connected with the interest of colonization in Palestine, they developed this idea of creating a country, a Jewish country. And as a Jewish country, it's an ethnic determined country, which necessary is a country with apartheid. It's impossible not to be. If the country is for one ethnic only, or one religion only, it's necessary an apartheid state. And it's what it is nowadays. It's an apartheid state. There are two kinds of citizenship, for Jewish and for non-Jewish people. Non-Jewish meaning Arabic, right? So they were against the most revolutionary and the most progressive Jewish community, and proposed the idea of creating a state and many politics of migration, even before the establishment of the Jewish state.
And it's important for people to be aware that there's a whole broad diversity of political philosophies among the Jewish community. There's a long tradition of communist Jewish tradition. Rosa Luxemburg herself, right, came from a Jewish family. Marx himself was from a Jewish family. And so to criticize Zionism is not to criticize Jewish thought, it's simply to locate one particular ideology related to that community, which, as you were saying, comes from an elitist vision of what the role of this people is in the world, right?
Sure. The first thing is to separate Judaism from Zionism. Zionism is not Judaism, first of all. And Lenin also comments on this in his speeches. He says it's the amount of Jewish people in the revolutionary and communist movements are higher than the amount of Jewish people in general in the society. So it says it's people that tends to be progressive and revolutionary. So it was a dominant ideology which was not dominant by that time, but became dominant, especially with the Second World War. It's something that has to be considered. Two things that has, although Zionism exists since 1860, around 1860, and the politics of immigration started in 1918, 1920. This ideology got stronger with Holocaust, of course. And the idea of Holocaust was an excuse, in fact, to advocate the idea of an Israeli state to be. And
but they had the idea beforehand. It wasn't
much beforehand. Theodor Herz wrote his book, The Jewish State, in 1890 something.
Okay.
And the first Zionist Congress was in Basel in 1893.
Okay.
So the idea existed before. And it was not, as I said, a disseminate idea into the communities. People didn't want to go to Palestine. They didn't know Palestine. Why Palestine? So there was a great propaganda, which was a land without people for a people without a land. So they created the idea that Palestinian was a land without people. And they said there are written texts saying, oh, it's just half a dozen of tribes, half a dozen of blacks lost in the desert and something like this. And so they created this slogan to convince especially the Eastern European Jewish people, which are in bad conditions in their own countries, to immigrate to Palestine, much before the Holocaust, but already in a context of anti-Semitism, of course.
And why is there so much support from the West for Israel, even when it's so clear that it's broken all basic rules of war, of humanitarian decency, that it's turned into this colonial invasion? Why is there still so much support for them?
Because it goes along with their interests, I think. I think they go along with, and I don't think Western is for humanitarian ideas. On the contrary, I think Western world is capitalism in this phase, neoliberalism, is very close to fascism. You know, that's the point. It's not. It's false to think, wow, we are civilized people, and so why are we? No, it's not true. It's on the contrary. It comes. It's the same. And also, I think there was a point that Zionism became a dominant ideology even in the Western. That's the point. And it's something very curious, because when the State of Israel was created, many countries had strong and difficult politics to the interests of Jewish in their own countries. But this was surpassed nowadays, I think. And I think there is a Jewish dominant class which defines the ideas of the Jewish people, unfortunately. On the contrary of what it was during the 19th century, the progressive and so on. But I think that's it. It goes, they are in favor of this situation. They want to dominate the Middle East. They want to dominate that territory. They want to have an allied government in that territory. That's all. I think this is the main economical
It's a very powerful
base.
point you're making in terms of the nature of the West, at least today, right? Perhaps at some moment it had more of a democratic essence, but at least in this moment of late capitalism, or what you want to call it, the 21st century, it's absolutely consistent with its central interests of expansion and accumulation and domination. And in that way, the Second World War itself was not an exception, right? Because that's the liberal story, that somehow Hitler and the Second World War were
An exception.
aberration, an exception to the march of liberal progress, right? But in fact, it's part of the project itself. Would you say that?
Yes. Well, who invented colonization? They invented colonization. Racism. The colonization invented racism. hierarchy of races. It comes with colonization. There were peoples, not races. The very idea of a race is biologically false, and it's historically false, because the black people didn't consider themselves blacks. There were these people, Indian people, indigenous people, didn't consider themselves Indians, and so on. So I think colonialism is something that is intrinsically related to capitalism. Capitalism doesn't live without colonialism. It's the international division of work. So Palestine is part of it, and it's the same. It's precisely the same. It's not different from any other colonization. And if you see slavery in Brazil and all the atrocities and torture, they think, oh, dictatorships tortured, they are imprisoned people. No, torture is something that has ever been an established expedient to keep slavery, to keep all kinds of social structures. So it's the same. I think it's the same. The difference is time. It's really weird, the world to accept it in speech, because it's something. If you see African countries, they were getting their independence in 1950, 40, 50, 60, 70, and Palestine was being colonized by that time. So I think the difference is time, and I think it shows, in fact it shows the essential colonialism of all our world. Racism and colonialism of the world.
And the pockets of hope or resistance, Latin America offers a hope to humanity because of its tradition of political and social struggle, because of its syncretic and the diverse populations. Latin America, you see that as a possible hope for the future, or where would you look for hope?
I don't know how to answer this question. I see a lot of hope in Palestinian resistance. That's something I think it's different. People are aware of their history. I have the chance to go to Palestine and interviewed a lot of people, common people, children, and so on. And everybody knows precisely where their family were expelled from, what happened, and what they have to achieve. This land is mine, this land is called Palestine. And so there is a consciousness that I haven't seen in any other place, and a memory. For example, they have banners and these kind of things for every person that is killed or imprisoned by Israeli forces. And so you go to a neighborhood, to a village, and there are one on the other in the walls, and you never forget. And I keep thinking, imagine if in Brazil you put something like this in the communities for every black boy killed by the police, for example. It would be full of this. And so just to look at this, you gain some awareness, some consciousness of what we are living. And this is true in Palestine. Everybody has a national consciousness, not a communist consciousness, not socialist. There are limits, there are problems. There are political problems and the relationship with the national authority, which is very conciliatory to the occupation, which is a great problem. It's something, and Hamas, which is a fundamentalist party, and so on. So the Socialist Party, which was the most radical and better, today is, as in all other parts of the world, is very small. It's has no force. So there are problems, but the people, they are brave also. So they look at those soldiers, they look like a Robocop, you know, and then with a stone and a child, and they look in the eye, they are not afraid, and they say, it's something that they say, these are mosquitoes, because they are afraid of children. They are afraid of children. They are killing children in Gaza on purpose. It's not something that happens in a war. It is on purpose. It is their speech. If you don't kill the egg, in the future it will be a snake. It's a Nazi kind of thinking, right? So I think if I see any future, it's this kind of future with the resistance, and I see it in Palestinian resistance.
Thank you so much, Ana.
You're
Real
welcome.
privilege to have you here at the UNAM.
No, it was a pleasure.
Wonderful. Muchas gracias a nuestro muy amable público por estar con nosotros en otro programa intenso e inteligente de Diálogos por la Democracia. Te esperamos de nuevo en 8 días. Gracias.